So what I thought we'd do is we do an Osso Buco of lamb, or put a different way, we're doing a lamb shank. And what we have here is the shank, which is the shin bone of the lamb. Now you can do this with pork, you can do it with veal, and probably what you've seen in the restaurants is lamb shank or veal shank, probably veal shank more than anything else. And the thing about a Osso Buco is you see the bone right through the center here? Now again, given the different animal, this bone can be as small as it is here in the lamb, or it can be almost this large when we talk about veal. And the difference is that there's marrow. There's all that sweet, really incredible tasting marrow, that bone marrow that's down inside. So by stewing this, we're going to kind of get some of that to come out and flavor our sauce. And then with the veal shank, you actually usually serve it with a little cocktail fork so you can kind of dig down in there and get some of that marrow out because it's got some really cool, intense flavor. All right, so we got our pot nice and hot as always. We add some oil. And then I just do a flour dredging, and I'm going to want to sear this. I want to brown this a little bit on all sides. Now, we've talked about that before. Why do we do that with proteins? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. The first reason is that it adds some texture. I like to think in terms of sweet and sour and texture when I cook. Another reason is by searing the outside of this, it allows the juices and the inside of the meat to stay intact, to stay inside. So as we cook this, it doesn't just kind of leach out of there, and we don't get this dried piece of meat. Because remember, things on the animal that are used more are going to be more tough. They're not going to be the most tender cuts. So we're going to need to cook them in a fashion that allows us to get the most flavor, because they do have a lot of flavor, but also to cook it that we can coax some of the juice to stay inside. We can coax some flavor kind of out of it, but we also can make it a tender piece of meat. So we're going to start by browning it, and that's what we're doing here. We'll get that side going. We'll flip it. See, we got a little browning here. We got going a little bit. That's what we're looking for, okay? Now that flour in the bottom of the pan, that's all going to be fine. I'm going to add a little more of oil so that we don't burn the flour on the other sides. But that, again, is going to add some flavor, and that's going to help reduce our sauce. Okay, so while that's going, what we have now is we braise this thing. We figure we get all the sides going. All right, so maybe another minute or two, I get the other sides braised. So I'll just kind of show you a little bit more. We'll come back. I'll braise that in another pan during the commercial, so we keep going. So we got the hot oil. To this, we're going to add some onion. We'll break that up. We're going to add our celery. And we're going to add some carrot. And we've got the celery and the carrot cut about the same size because they're not going to melt. They're going to soften and cook, but they're not going to melt. The onion, we did a nice thin julienne. That's going to melt up and kind of melt right into the sauce. All right, so we let that go for a couple of minutes, then we're going to add our sliced garlic. And again, if you prefer the chopped garlic or the mashed garlic, that's fine. I like the sliced garlic because that's going to add some flavor to the dish. We're not going to get big hunk, mouthful bites of this garlic. It's not going to be that pungent. It's going to kind of melt into the sauce too, along with some of the onions. Okay, so that's going. Now, some of the things that we have in addition to that, what I have here is we're going to use some red wine vinegar. We're going to use some wine, some red wine in this case. And I get asked often, what kind of red wine do you use? Well, my theory is if you'll drink it, it's good enough to drink, then it's obviously good enough to cook with. Because ultimately, the flavor in this wine and what we add to this dish is only as good as what we start with. So if it's a type of wine that you wouldn't even think about drinking, why would you put it to this dish and we're going to eat it? I mean, it's the same thing, right? You're going to have to deal with the flavor. So what I think is, if you had something last night, you have half a bottle open, you got some wine on the counter that you didn't finish, which is okay. That's perfect. That's the place I would probably start. So we're going to add some red wine vinegar. And then we're going to add some of our red wine. Okay, now while that's going, we're going to let that kind of stew down. It's going to simmer down, reduce down by about 50%. We're going to add our braised veal cheek, or I'm sorry, braised lamb shank. I'm so used to doing the veal cheeks. We're going to add that back in. Now, while that's going, and that's starting to reduce, let me tell you a little bit about the last couple of ingredients. What I have here is overnight we soaked in water, in the fridge, a bowl of adzuki beans. Now, for this dish, you can leave the beans out, but I just think when you're making a hearty stick-to-your-ribs dish like we're doing here with this Osso Buco, beans is just a natural component. They're going to add some flavor. They're going to really just kind of add a little extra something to this dish besides all the vegetables. And you can use any kind of bean you like. Now, if you don't want to buy dried beans, although I don't know why you wouldn't. If you go to the market and you find dried beans, they're real simple. Basically what you want to do is you want to soak them in water a day or two, rinse them off, and then they're ready to go. They're ready to be cooked. Well, what we can do is we can rinse them after we soak them here. We can kind of boil them in water, and we can par cook them for a larger style bean. But for these adzukis, you can see the size of them. They're pretty small beans. There's no need. We can just take these now that we've soaked them, and we've got these things ready to go. We're going to add them right to our pan. Okay, and I'm going to put them all in because I like them. Now they're going to cook the same way that the lamb shank is. They're going to cook right in our pot, all right? So in addition to that, I've got about 12 to 14 ounces here of canned tomatoes, because the reason I'm using the canned tomatoes here is we've got the whole tomatoes here, and we've got the juice that they're packed in. We're going to add that. And last but not least, in a classic braised dish, or classic Italian-style braised dish, is what I've got here is a little bit of veal stock. You can use lamb stock. You can use, I mean, if you're good, you're making lamb stock at home, I'm proud of you. You can use the veal stock. I'll put just a little bit in. If you want to instead, you can use water. You can use chicken stock. But to me, if you got a choice between water and a stock, the stock's always going to add more flavor. It's adding another layer of flavor to the dish, so why not use the stock? And then to season the whole thing up, notice I haven't added any salt or pepper. We'll do that before we taste the dish and plate it for our guests. Just kind of stir everything in there. Well, we got that going. I've got here some rosemary, and I've got some fresh thyme. Now, the thyme, I think we're going to kind of break up, and we're just going to add right to the pan that way. And the rosemary, what I'll do is, again, we've talked about that before. There's a bunch of different ways of adding rosemary to a dish. What you can do is you can pull it apart, chop it up. You can put the leaves in there whole. You can put the whole branch in there, if you will, the whole thing. I think, you know, we could make a bouquet garni, really fancy word of saying we can tie up all these fresh herbs in a little cheesecloth and dip it in there and then pull it out in the end. I just think that we'll do it this way, and we'll pull the rosemary out. Okay, so we've got the thyme in there. We've got the beans. We've got some red wine vinegar. I'm going to crush up our tomatoes here, which are going to add a nice little consistency. We're going to cover this. It's brought to a boil. I'm going to lower it to a simmer, and I'm going to cover this. I'm going to let this go for about an hour and a half, and there you go. An hour and a half later, this is what we'd have. We'd have this really cool looking, well, let's start by taking out that rosemary. All right, we'll do it this way. Get rid of that. So we've got that rosemary flavor, but we don't have any big chunks of rosemary in there. Now I've got some garlic mashed potatoes here, and I thought what we'd do is, look at that. See how the meat's just falling off the bone? I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about with this braising, all right? That's what we want. Now, again, you know, maybe for I would guess an entree for one person, maybe you want to use 2 of these. You want to cook a whole bunch. I mean, you could do that. You could put 6 or 8 of these in one big pot and do the whole thing for more than just one shank, and that would work out really well. So I think for one person, though, we do this braised shank like that. Then we grab some of this celery and carrot and onion. And now let me show that. Can you see here a little? Let me show you a piece. We got a piece of onion. You can't even find it. See that? It melted right through. Here we go. See the onion hanging down here? So when I talk about how you cut everything the same way, you cut the celery, you cut the carrot so they all cook the same way. The onion's one of those type of things that it's just going to kind of melt. And there you go. It's just melted right into our sauce. So the onion I wasn't worried about. But everything else that you're going to want to take bites of and kind of notice in there, you're going to want to make sure it's cut the same size so that it cooks at the same rate of speed. All right, so we'll put a little bit of the beans, a little bit of the other ingredients on there. And then I think what we need to do is, let's do this before I make too much of a mess all over my counter. Take a little bit of that sauce. Now there's another classic Italian way to finish this. What my grandma would have done, and we do at the restaurant for our veal shanks, veal Osso Buco, is I would add just a little bit of zest. Orange, some lemon, and some lime zest. And that zest, we put that in before we put that pot on, before we let it go for about an hour and a half. And what that's going to do is it's going to add a whole nother dimension, another layer of flavor, which is actually really, really good. But you know something, for the lamb, I didn't think we need the citrus. I would do that with pork or veal. But for lamb, I don't think it was necessary. So there you have it. That's a real simple dish. Again, I'm teaching you guys, boys, simple dishes. Dishes that you can do in one pot. Go to the market. It's a very inexpensive cut of meat. If you don't want to do lamb, do veal or do pork. Grab some of these forelegs, these shanks, these Osso Bucos, if you would, from the market. Bring them home and try it like this. You can mix up the veg. You can mix up the beans that you want to use. But I'm telling you what, no matter which way you do it, this one's a great dish. Easy to make, one pot, simple cleanup. Best part is I could make this a day ahead of time and just bring it right, reheat it right back on the stovetop. So there's no excuse why you don't try this one at home.